Welcome to today's choice event. I'm super happy to introduce you to this important topic of how to engage suppliers on Scope 3 decarbonization and how to qualify them, assess them, manage, and really drive towards impact together. But before we jump into the webinar, I just gonna introduce you to the format of the choice events. Maybe it's the first time for you to be here, and I also see we have already quite a lot of people joining, but there are always more coming in the first minutes. So please bear with me introducing you for ever who is not here the first time. So first of all, my name is Lara. I'm one of the co-founders from the Climate Choice. And how we have set up the choice events is that we are recording everything. So you don't have to be too busy just taking notes. You can listen in and relax a little bit. Also, we have here the format that I am visible and you are not. But that doesn't mean we don't invite you to participate very actively. So the first function you can find in today's webinar is a Q&A function, which you normally have somewhere on the bottom or on top. Maybe it also says Fragen und Antworten if you have a German setup. And I would be super curious to know who's joining in today. So please feel free to just write in your name and maybe from where you are listening today. So for me, that would be Lara, Berlin. And I'm gonna wait and see who's the first one who dares to find out the check function and to introduce him or herself. So first message comes in and it's Tim from Dortmund. So great. Thanks for doing or for sharing. Daniel from Munich and Caroline from Nuremberg. So that's amazing. Now you know where the number gonna pop up when anyone asks a question. And I really invite you to do that over the webinar. So whenever you have a question, please put it there. You're gonna see it. Also what the others are sharing. You can comment what others are sharing. You can post in your own links, referring content and so on. Please have a respectful tone, but that's what we always had so far. And we're going to collect all the questions here, and maybe some we can introduce or comment on already. Others we're going to bundle, and then in the last 15 minutes, normally we have in Q&A and go together with the experts into these questions. So that's amazing and really benefit from also introducing each other to the community joining today. And then the second tool is you have been invited over email to join our Team Climate Slack group. So normally the webinar is very short and you might have questions afterwards, or you want to introduce yourself or ask questions. And we have over 1,500 people joining from companies being interested in climate and supply chain decarbonization. And it's a possibility to stay in touch and keep exchanging on that topic. And then, a short intro to us, the Climate Choice. We are a climate tech company based in Berlin, and our mission is to make every company a climate champion. And thereby we mean that they are transforming their own company and decarbonize their supply chain. So really figure out data-based ways to bring in a new format of managing climate within the company and along the supply chain. And that ties very well into today's topic, and you're going to learn more today. And second thing, what we are doing, because we see a lot of companies are just starting in that area. I think the whole topic of climate management is very new still, and therefore we try to foster as much communication and community building around that topic for businesses as possible. And we have our yearly summit coming up. It's now this year the fourth time, which is really crazy. We are doing the Climate Summit. It's a pure online event for 2 days on 11th and 12th. And the topic is how to make transformation happen in companies and supply chains. And we have 2 days full of panels, workshops, interaction to learn from active activists, scientists, from experts from the field, from practitioners. So everyone working on that topic and driving together actions for really making a difference within companies. And that shall be it from my side for the introduction, where you find yourself for this lunch break. And before I'm going to hand over to our experts today, which are Max and Yasha, I'm going to have a quick question for you, which is your possibility to become active again. So you should see a small poll now appearing on your screen. And it's basically from which industry are you joining, or in which role are you working, in which industry, to maybe just see probably during the webinar, we have different perspectives then coming in. And yeah, so the first option is from energy, second, manufacturing, then construction, food, fast-moving consumer goods, wholesale, transportation, finance, information, technology, and others. And I think a lot of you have been choosing, and I'm gonna stop it and share the result with you. So actually, how I see it, most of you, 20%, come from manufacturing, which is interesting. And then we have information technology, and then more or less on the same level, food, fast-moving consumer good, and transportation and wholesale. So very much a mixture, which is amazing. So very interested in seeing maybe also different questions coming up from different industries. And then the second question is, as we are talking about supply chain engagement on climate data and decarbonization, where are you right now in this process? Like, do you work already with your suppliers on assessing climate data? Is that something you have just started? Or no, it's today the first introduction to the topic, or yes, I'm already well experienced in that. And yeah, probably you can share also your best practices or experiences with us here today, or other. And again, I see a lot of you have taken the chance already. And I share the result. So I think 60% of you are just in the process of working on it. So that's amazing. And then also another 10% are already well experienced. So please bring that up as well. And then 23%, and that is also really good, have not yet started, but are seeking for an introduction. So that's really much what the webinars are also about, to take the first steps and to meet other people who are like just in the same place and want to learn more. So really good to have such a nice mixture as well. And from here, I would very much welcome now Max and Yasha on stage to join me here in today's webinar. I see Yasha popping up and Max. So hello, how are you both?
Good afternoon.
Very good.
Great.
Good, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. So I can hear you both. That's always a good sign to start with. And is that poll surprising for you? Maybe Max, to see 60%, I think it was almost, have been starting already in that field, or expected?
I think it's a clear sign that it's necessary to start, but I think it's not really a big experience or a big change. I think we are all in this transition and the path across. What I'm happy was that we saw so many people from a manufacturing background. That's my background as well. So I'm looking forward not only to our presentation, but also the Q&A session in the after fact.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I'm gonna have a look the whole time in the Q&A what comes in, and probably also remind you afterwards so that we can have a nice discussion. And I think you can share, and I'm gonna leave the presentation with you and would then later come back for the Q&A. And I make sure in the chat that all questions are seen and answered. So stage is yours, and see you in a bit.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot, Lara. And I was also, really great insights. So thanks a lot for participating in this small poll. I think I can also just speak from my conversations that I have that it's, a lot of companies are currently thinking about what do we do about our Scope 3 emissions, and that's why we're happy to, share a little bit our experience today and our focus topics. So Max, I would give you the first maybe introduction quickly, so you can introduce yourself to the audience for today's webinar.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. My name is Max Droste. I'm working for AMC Group in Germany, which is a management consultancy, focused primarily on procurement and supply chain management. My focus there is strategy development and implementation, but also sustainable procurement. And that obviously comes with decarbonization efforts. I think in Germany, a lot of the people and practitioners are currently working on implementing the human rights due diligence law. So that's something that we're very busy with. That's about it. Before my life as a consultant, I worked as a procurement professional. So I have about 10 years of experience and coming from a manufacturing background and agricultural background. So I'm really happy to discuss afterwards also some of the implications that we see in the manufacturing world.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Max. And also a quick introduction about myself. I'm Yasha Tarani. I'm one of the founders and CEO at The Climate Choice. I mainly work with our clients on qualifying, assessing, and developing suppliers. So really happy to have this webinar today together with our partner AMC Group. With that, I'd like to start into the topic. And I always feel that a good reason to start, or a good first step to start into the topic, is always to ask ourselves, okay, why is this important? Why should we even work on that topic? And what are the drivers that also drive us as companies to work on decarbonization, right? So we're seeing that more and more global enterprises are facing various risks and pressures from stakeholders to meet their climate targets, right? There's more and more companies that are setting up climate targets for their organization. Of course, science-based targets is the basically the de facto standard if we're talking about climate targets. And these are just a few companies of those that have committed or set targets with this initiative. And the issue is with setting targets also. Scope 3 targets are basically now also standard with the science-based targets initiative. If you're setting Scope 3 targets, which basically mean emissions that are coming from your upstream and downstream value chain, and you're analyzing these emissions, most of the time it's actually up to 85% in average of the total emissions of the company. So it's more than Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, and all the other emissions together. Most of the emissions are actually coming from the supply chain, And this is just one statistic by CDP that they're on average 11.4 times larger than all other emissions in total. And with that context in mind, looking further in Scope 3 and also in the comparison of where emissions coming from, this is a really great study also by CDP and the Boston Consulting Group, where they looked at, okay, where are actually in the different industries where the emissions coming from. And there we can see on the one end, in the end products, a lot of the emissions are actually bought, right? They're coming from the upstream supply chain. But of course, there are differences. If we're looking at raw materials, the operation and consumed power, so Scope 1 and 2 emissions might be larger for organizations. But as you have seen already, it's a lot of big brands that are setting targets. And as we're not, or as we have quite complex value chains nowadays, it's really important to understand, okay, what emissions do I buy, or where do my suppliers stand, in order to really make decisions and drive down those emissions. The problem, or like the first thought, of course, when thinking about, okay, what data do we collect, or what can we get from our suppliers to better understand the emissions, is of course product related information. So ideally, we would like our suppliers to provide us product carbon footprint information, life cycle assessment data, in order to really compare services and products with each other. The issue and what we're seeing in the market is that most of the companies are not ready yet to provide this information. And I would like to also, maybe as a topic also for the discussion later, as a lot of you already mentioned that that you just started working on getting data from your suppliers on how this experience is on your end. But we're seeing often that there's this data is not available, even on a company level. It's hard to get comparable data from suppliers. A lot of the times questionnaires are being unanswered when we talk with suppliers, as we're doing a lot of review and providing kind of like insights to the data also for the suppliers. We see that suppliers getting, of course, from a lot of customers, different questionnaires, different data requests. So there's also a little bit of kind of like a tiredness of answering questionnaires. And of course, also what's an issue, and that is not only at suppliers. I mean, like a lot of companies currently are just building up the decarbonization expertise, especially in the context of now the reporting requirements in the European Union. But what we really have to say is that it's your climate targets are really at risk. So if your suppliers are not aligned with your climate strategy, I think we can agree that it's risky, right? We cannot commit to a target if we not know how to measure it, how to measure progress, how to understand maybe also the differences between suppliers, and really understand, okay, which business partners are really aligned with our targets in organizations, and can also provide the underlying information to make sure that we working on the same ambition level. And this is becoming more and more important. I recently received this Spiegel article from a friend of mine that highlighted a study, a recent study on statistics that around now we're at a stage where around 50% of European corporations have set climate targets, but less than 5% can actually demonstrate how they intend to implement them. And there's no serious action yet, especially in the areas of the supply chains. And why is this important? Of course, not only regulators are looking at this, and stakeholders like the media are addressing these issues and highlighting this more and more, but it's also that banks are more and more paying attention to the climate targets in the portfolio, and they want to understand how their investment decisions are actually impacting their targets as well. So this is becoming more and more an issue to really not only set targets, but also have a clear strategy and a clear target on how to achieve those targets, and how to work with in the supply chain, for example, on how to achieve those targets. So now we're getting into the topic of really how to qualify, assess, and develop suppliers for Scope 3 decarbonization. And with that, a quick overview on what is actually, on how does it actually work to calculate emissions from suppliers. This is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Technical Guidance on Scope 3, and there you can see in the bottom, you can see the usage of average data, right? And then there's the hybrid method, where you're taking some supplier-specific data, a combination of average data and supplier-specific data. And of course, you want to get there that you just use supplier-specific data to really make informed buying decisions for decarbonization. As we've seen, currently we're really on the bottom, right? So we're looking, or we're mostly looking at average data. I always say this is like calculating with an average price. It's really hard to make a decision if every product kind of like looks the same from that perspective, and that's why we need to find ways on how to still move forward, although the data is not available yet. And that's what you can also see from the Science-Based Targets status report that was published in February, where you can see an average companies on all scope 3 categories use 6% supplier-specific factors. But if you look at purchased goods and services, it's only 3% of the companies that responded to this survey that they're using supplier-specific information. So this also now again underlines on where do we currently stand in terms of data availability. And with that, we can really see that companies facing various challenges when approaching their suppliers, both for product-specific information or also for other data that we're now looking in the next step with Max more detailed on it. But we see really that there's various levels of understanding about climate and decarbonization in the supplier base. There's really a lack of access to accurate CO2 data, and also of best practices around climate management, and a lot of missing tools and benchmarks and understanding. And of course, then a lot of supplier bases are spread around various countries and of course various business sizes. And with that, I would like to hand over to Max again to go deeper into the topic of actually how to go about that. Max.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Yasha, for the explanation. And I think what you've made pretty clear is the why, right? So we've talked quite a bit about why it's important to act, why we in general need to move towards a decarbonized economy. So the big question left is how. And what we want to talk about today a little bit is how processes can help in this way and in this journey towards decarbonization. And our big catch point here is that sustainability, compliance, decarbonization, and all of these ESG regulations do not come through declarations of intent, but must be anchored in the procurement process, also in the supply chain process. So why process is the key. And before we move to the next slides, I would just briefly like to say a couple of words about why processes are so important when we talk about decarbonization, but in general as well. Consistency, right? If we all stick to the same process, we have a certain consistency. It makes, in general, the work more efficient, so we are able to improve. Once we have a set standard and a process, we can control for quality. We can hold each other accountable. We can hold each other accountable in a bigger standard on small levels, but also on higher scales. Once we have a standardized process, we can improve, right? So classical lean concepts, for those that came from manufacturing background here, continuous improvement is such a big lever here in this scenario. And processes make it possible for organizations to scale their intentions and in this way of transformation. So in general, I think this is why it's so important that the process is the key. And when we talk about process and when we talk about technology, we can say that technology is, at the end of the day, means to an end, but not the mean in itself and not the end in itself. So in order for it to work and in order for it to boost this transformation, we need clear targets. I think that's what Yasha said about earlier. And we need to have a defined and clear structured process. So the interesting factor here for decarbonization, I think, is that we have a lot of these things already in place. We have a clear idea where, at least in the European Union, we want to be by 2050. So we have clear targets, at least on a very high level. You just mentioned from that article in the magazine that roughly 50% of the companies already have targets for themselves where they want to be. And I think if we put this in a bigger perspective and understand that depending on the sector, up to 80 or 90% of the emissions come from scope 3 and the supply chain, then we understand why it's so important to properly manage your supply chain. Because if you have a pool of suppliers in your structure that is not aligned with these goals, you're going to have an issue, because you're not going to be able to meet your own targets. And that's why we come into this how, and why process is such an important factor here to become successful in this transformation. When we talk about processes, at AMC Group, we have developed over the last couple of years a functional model, which is explained and showed on the next page if you want to move forward. For those that come not from a technical department or background in purchasing, just a brief overview. We have 3 different levels here of processes. And this process map is geared towards supply chain management and procurement. So in total, we have roughly 89 processes that are necessary for a modern and ready for transformation organization. We divide them here in 3 levels. So at the top, you have strategic processes. And when we talk about strategic processes, it's such primarily long-term processes such as category management or long-term strategy development, but especially also supplier relationship management. They build basically the guardrails of action for an organization. So once you've set clear standards and a clear idea of where your strategic processes are working, then it makes it easier in the tactical level to basically deploy them, right? So when we're talking about tactical processes, we're talking about sales and operations planning, so midterm processes. We're talking about sourcing as well, very important, because once you have a clear understanding of how you want to buy, then it makes it easier to deploy this within a sourcing strategy. So we have strategic processes, we have tactical processes, and then we have the operational processes. So when we're talking about operational processes, these are primarily processes that are capable of being digitalized and are the ones that create little to no value. Think of your classic procure to pay process from the requester to receiving the invoice. And then we have a set of services that are accompanying these processes, and together this makes up the map, so to speak, or the roadmap, and landscape for a modern procurement organization. What we want to talk about today is an highlight of this process map, and that is supplier relationship management. We have that here highlighted in this little box, but I think on the next page there's a little bit more detailed understanding here. And when we talk about using process and technology to boost your way towards transformation, we will go into more detail in these sub-processes, but for the lack of time, I think in detail, we do not have to go so much in this sub-level. It will be enough for the next steps that we go and talk about the substructures. But before we do that, I just briefly want to kind of explain the idea of these processes. So when you see here the global approach to supplier relationship management, it is always triggered by something. So think of the trigger or the input as your company policies, but also regulations that come from a government or international organizations. It can be your supplier strategy, multiple things that basically start this process of supplier relationship management. The intent, as we've had in the past, is pretty simple. We want to be able to increase, let's say, delivery time or increase the quality of certain products. So these are the intentions and the why. Then we take a look at the output and the results of this process. And at the end of the day, we want to be sure to have all suppliers qualified according to a certain standard, right? So we want to be able to have them go through a qualification process. We want to be able to have them evaluated. We want to be in a possibility to classify them. And at the end of the day, we want to define the relevant supply base that helps us move in this transition, right? So this is the basic idea of supplier relationship management. And in the next couple of slides, I think it would be nice, or we are going to explain in more detail what are success factors for each of these sub-steps and how technology can help along the way. Because maybe just as a general remark, obviously supplier relationship management is nothing new, but we see this every day in projects with our customers, that we have very different understanding of what supplier relationship management is, and also the maturity level on the deployment within the company. So I think it's always very nice to have these charts. And in the next step, let's dive a little bit deeper into the supplier structure. When we talk about supplier structure, obviously this means that we understand who we have in our base, right? If we take a look at here the participants of this webinar, you mentioned multiple backgrounds that you come from, but especially in manufacturing and electronics industry, we have sometimes supply chains that consist of multiple thousands of vendors. So you have a very complex structure in general. And the first step in order to be able to implement a good strategy for transformation is a certain transparency. So understanding who is part of your supplier structure and how you want the supplier structure to be developed in the future. So at the one hand, or on the one hand, it's obviously a status quo and understanding who's part of this. But also the exercise of how can a supplier structure in the future look like, right? So if we talked about these goals earlier, if you have a company goal to be net zero or have a net zero goal by 2050, obviously your suppliers are going to have the same goals. If 80 or 90% of your emissions come from scope 3, they have to be at least aligned with your target. If you have a supply structure that is full of slackers, so to speak, it's going to be very hard for you to be able to achieve your goals. So an output of this process of the substructure or defining the substructure is understanding, let's say, optimization potentials, but also to conclude what kind of base of analysis you need. The example that Yasha put in here is an example of their software, which then shows a more accurate supplier screening within this platform. So this is exactly what we talk about when we meet structure, right? In the past, this is something that is done on, let's say, innovation, competitiveness, quality. Now we're adding a layer, and we're adding the layer of climate performance. So we have here 3 levels, just to make it a little bit more simplified here for today. And we understand that we have here, for example, in level 1, companies or organizations that have no data on scope 1 and 2. They have no understanding, they have no transparency on their data, they have no set targets. This is obviously a group of suppliers that is going to make it for you very hard to reach your goals, right? Whereas on the level 3, you have companies that have visibility. They understand their products, they understand their footprint, and they have a clear goal and target communicated. So this is the first step of being able to use your supplier structure to help transformation along the way. Obviously, the visibility in this process of defining the structure. Once you have this visibility, on the one hand of the current situation, but also of a future state, it's important to define criteria and rules to be part of your supplier structure. So if we move to the next slide and we go a little bit more deeper into the process of pre-qualification, then also a classic process which is currently used in most of the procurement departments. But in the past, this is a process or has been used to ensure, let's say, minimum standards through certain barriers of entry, right? So you want to have a qualification criteria of, let's say, an ISO certificate for 9001, or you want to have certain terms and conditions that need to be agreed upon. So the barriers, or we always talk about the bouncer, right? You want to have a strict door policy for your company in order to have the right players in your supply base to reach your goals. Again, just like in the supplier structure, there is now a need to additionally add new criteria. So an example here, we have again different criteria. We see CCF data, so corporate carbon footprint. That means you want to have companies or you want to have companies join that understand their own footprint. Even further, maybe have a product carbon footprint so that they enable you to give better data and give better data also to your customers, but understand and put you in a position to make smart choices when it comes to choosing between different items, right? You want to maybe have an internal price for carbon emissions, and then obviously if you have a product with a lower carbon footprint, it makes the total savings lower. Have they set climate targets? If you have a certain target that your company wants to be carbon neutral, let's say by 2045, you obviously have to find the right supplier base that also shares these targets. So the output of this process of pre-qualification, if it's a new supplier, or qualification journey in general, if it's existing supply base, is that across your baseline, you have defined registration criteria that help you reach your goals. So it's very important to do this exercise and understand how do our company goals affect the criteria for new suppliers. Do you have to make this connect? Excuse me, my voice left a little bit. So, but I think the idea is pretty clear on why it's important to set these criteria. If we move to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about evaluation, also a concept that should not be new to experienced procurement professionals, because the strategic supplier evaluation has been done for years. Speaking from experience, again, a lot of companies just see it as a criteria to fulfill their requirements for an ISO certificate. And we do see every once in a while customers that don't even share their own rating of the suppliers with their supply base. Obviously, that makes no sense. If you go through the exercise of assessing the supplier performance, please let them know, communicate it with them, because you have the expectations that they are going to be better. And if they don't know where they stand, they cannot improve. But when we talk about supplier evaluation, again, the input is, and the intention is, we want to be able to identify high performance. We want to be able to identify the people or the companies that are slacking, that are not performing against the standards we set. We want to be able to increase their performance across time, right? We want to see if they develop themselves in a certain path. Now, if we're talking about the past, main criteria for good strategic supplier evaluation have been such things as delivery performance or quality, number of defects across the delivery spectrum, competitiveness in general. But now, again, we need to add a new layer and say we need to be able to assess their climate performance. So how do we go about this? If we take a look at the dashboard here that Yasha put in there, these are exactly the questions that we are going to have to answer in a transformation journey towards net zero, because we're going to have to assess and ask them, do you have good governance? Is your leadership aligned on these goals? Do you have targets? Are your targets in line with our targets? Are they in line with regulatory affairs? If you have metrics, how do you measure them? Do you transparently communicate them? So these are all questions that need to be answered, and they can be measured and tracked in a standardized way, and it helps to increase the performance of the strategic supply evaluation, right? So we're adding again another layer to this process of evaluation, and at the end of the day, the output and the result is that we have all relevant suppliers evaluated. Now, this is where it becomes crucial, because a lot of companies still evaluate their suppliers. They might even have the next process step of supplier criteria. If you move to the next slide, please. When we talk about the actual step here of classification, which is a result of the evaluation, right? In the past, this was primarily, let's say, an ABC analysis. So you have a preferred vendor system where you have A vendors that, for example, have certain criteria, like they get new tenders every time there is a new tender in their category. But you also have low performers, and you have to put a plan into place how to either increase their performance so they perform against your standard, or you have to come up with a plan to phase them out. But this rating is going to help you in this classification. So when we talk about and take a look at the example here that Yasha put in there, you can see, let's say, multiple actors across the supply base plotted against their performance. So your classical ABC or your A suppliers are going to be suppliers, for example, that scored higher than 75% on this climate check. You have a base of performers that have really bad results, let's say less than 40 or 50 score. So if your supply base and looks like this, then you know what you have to do in order to be able to reach your own targets. You're going to have to work with the top performers to keep their performance high and maybe even increase share of business with them. And you're going to have to actively manage the low performers, either on their way towards top performance or on their way out. And I think this is a good and very critical picture for a lot of suppliers and a lot of companies in general, because it means that at the end of the day, the business case for sustainability is going to pay out, right? It means that moving forward, there might not be any room in an economy for low performers. That's why you have to act. That's why it's important to be able to get this under control and start this transformation. Because at the end of the day, we are all in the belief that companies who are not performing properly will not have a right to existence anymore 10, 15 years from now. So when we talk about input and output, now we have undertaken multiple steps in this supplier relationship process. We have defined our supplier structure. We have defined criteria to be able to work with us. We have evaluated our supply base. We have classified our supply base according to who we want to work with. And now, obviously, some of the things that we just talked about need to be implemented. So this is the actual how. So supplier strategy and development are processes that help ensure that these targets are met. Classic supplier strategy could be consisting of a roadmap where you say, this is your status quo, here's where we want to achieve, and here's the steps that we are going to take in order to be able to get from A to B in time C. So this is obviously something that is individual per supplier. I think on this next step, I think we have a good example of a public example that we can use from Telia and their supplier strategy. This is something that we found online, just so that everybody can also have an understanding. The next slide has a even bigger picture of this, and it kind of shows these process steps that we just talked about in action. Yasha, I think we have one bigger slide, right? Yeah. So if you think about the process steps that we just talked about, for example, the pre-qualification, you can map and see some of these in action here. We have clearly CO2 as a decision criteria, and we have certain targets and prerequisites that were done in 2019. And then we have this implementation plan. So this implementation plan here is a clear, let's say, supplier strategy, even though it's across the board for a bigger set of suppliers. Obviously, the category managers or the responsible buyers would then have to take a look at their supply base and look at their relevant suppliers and see and check how their individual suppliers perform in this, right? And it's pretty clear here from something like this that you can see the goals and how they are going to be distributed across the supply chain, and that at the end of the day, there's going to be an issue for those companies that are not in line with this plan, because at the end of the day, they're not going to get any new business. And if that's not a business case in general, then I don't know what is, because it really affects then the whole supply base. So in total, I think this is a very clear process cycle that we are all aware of, especially from the procurement department. And I think to think in these process steps makes it a little bit more feasible to understand what the big impacts are and how we can tackle such big issues as climate change with tools that are existing. At least it helped me to understand how we can go in this journey, because sometimes obviously a sustainable development and sustainable procurement are quite overwhelming, and it's really good to sometimes take the big picture and then zoom in and figure out what that means for your actual supplier strategy and process. So with that said, I think we talked enough about processes, and we're going to go a little bit further into the solution, and then hopefully have some time to discuss some specific questions as well.
So yeah, thanks a lot, Max. And yeah, we of course want to make show an example on how we do it. Of course, you can do this also by yourself, right? And define metrics and define questions and get the suppliers. So this is just, of course, an example on how we can support that process. How we're approaching this for various companies is that we really have developed a methodology and also a scoring. I've seen there's already a question around what the CPA score actually means. So there's of course a methodology, a rating methodology behind it to have that transparently available and also give both the supplier but also the buying company an overview of actually what does it mean and what are the criteria for specific scores. But also you can, of course, in this process or that we've showed here in the climate intelligence platform, of course, access existing supplier profiles. So we currently list around 15,000 companies in the database, also from public available data, so that there's also the opportunity to not always request new information, but rather ask the supplier to share existing information with you. That is, of course, also helpful for the supplier, but also for you in terms of a process. If suppliers go through rating with us, companies also receive benchmarks and support around what they actually can take out of this, right? So we developed a framework that is very actionable and that derives basically recommendations for action out of it. So that's actually closing the loop on the data collection. We always also say that data collection is not a means to an end, right? We need to do something with the data, and that is kind of like goes in both directions. So if you have an understanding on how your supplier base looks, okay, what's the plan and how do you implement change? But same for the suppliers. So what can you provide to the suppliers if you collect data about their climate performance? Maybe it's benchmarks, maybe it's insights that you know about or that you have experienced about your supplier base that is relevant for suppliers to know and understand on what are necessary or what are recommended next steps and topics that they should focus on next. And then, of course, the tracking is a part which has, of course, the challenge of consistency of data collection to make sure, right, on how do you track this over time, which, as mentioned, we provide actually also already starting a free tool to help you to get onto this journey. Going a little bit more into the process of screening and then also evaluating suppliers to dive a little bit deeper on how we approach this. And please, of course, feel free to implement this in your company with a similar process also without our platform. We're super happy if this if we see more companies working on analyzing their supplier base. But we typically start at screening the supplier base, so which is really get a holistic understanding on where do my suppliers stand in order to really gather insights and derive targets about requirements on how they should improve over time, and how should the supplier structure look in like 5 years ahead in order to support your climate targets. Identify really the CO2 aware suppliers through that process. It's really also important to not overwhelm companies with like a load of questions, right, that they might not be able to answer. So that's why we're taking this two-step approach and first start with the screening, understand the maturity, and then go deeper. And of course, platforms like ours, but also others outside, automate a lot of the work. So it's a lot of, the time and communication efforts, and also, the data gathering can be, of course, improved if you use the platform for automating these processes. As mentioned, in a second step, we're focusing typically on key suppliers that are more ready on providing information and are also, based on purchasing volume or emission intensity, the most relevant suppliers for your climate strategy. And that's where we typically evaluate suppliers with companies. So we focus really on verified insights. So in climate, of course, there's a lot of challenges about comparability of data. So answering questions: how were emissions calculated? Are they documented? Making sure the data can be audited, right, and used in reports. And then also, first of all, derive the scorecards or scores and benchmarking from those, or provide specific data sources, then specific data points to companies that they want to integrate in a larger sustainability score. These are typically use cases that we see. But really, with these key suppliers, then being able to really have the core insights. So these could be KPIs and metrics such as climate or the emission intensity, but also detailed emission and target analysis. So really can map out the risk and the information around your supplier base to really develop suppliers with a clear focus on the most emission intense ones. Just a case. Oh, sorry, there's one more slide. Yeah, this is just an example. Turning data into impact. So of course, using that data, visualizing that data, providing maybe data points to your procurement team so they can actually have access and transparency on a day-to-day basis to this via dashboards, but also then, of course, for the sustainability team that is more broadly driving the climate strategy in the company. So I'm just looking at time. We're almost over, so I'm going quickly through the case. So this is an example. We worked, for example, with O2 Telefonica in a similar matter where we screened around 1,000 suppliers and conducted detailed analysis of their top 40 suppliers and really support them on uncovering potentials in the supplier base for the decarbonization part. I think with that, yes, that's the last slide. Thanks a lot for bearing with us. Really want to encourage to really start working on the supply chain decarbonization rather today than tomorrow, right? Start small, think big, as we had in one of the past webinars. I really like that context. So please feel free to reach out to Max, which of course with AMC Group is working with several companies on that topic and can share a lot of insights and experience with that. Of course, we want to encourage you take advantage of our free product. Maybe it helps you to save some time on your efforts, and we would of course be happy to support your efforts as well. Thanks a lot. And Lara, it's over to you again.
Yeah, great. So first of all, thanks for the overview. I think that was quite condensed for like a lunch break. So everyone, got probably like best output for such a short time. And I really love to bring like more transparency in this complex topic of, I think you said it before, supply chain decarbonization can sound like very complex, rather theoretically, and like it needs this breakdown into, okay, what does it mean practically, and how do I bring it in my sustainability team, but then also the procurement team very much. So that is what we focus on today, sometimes also finance or compliance and so on. So yeah, very much thank you for this walkthrough. Maybe one question that came up was like, okay, I think I would reframe it a little bit. What is the goal or the outcome, and how do I want to like develop my suppliers? So there was a question: if suppliers report they are climate neutral, how do I deal with that? Is that something I would assume where I stop, or is it still like something to go on? How do I take it forward? Like, what is really the goal here when we talk about developing the suppliers? I don't know. Maybe Yasha, you want to go first, and then second one for Max.
Maybe you have been aware of that the EU is taking further steps on having very clear regulations on claims like climate neutrality, and there we expect to see much more kind of like regulation around that. But with a focus on how we look at this is really that we're looking around CO2 emissions and then the standards of greenhouse gas protocol on how to account for emissions, and we not necessarily looking for climate neutrality claims, but rather looking at the underlying data on what supports what you communicate. So also maybe in connection to the question that came on what does the CPA score mean, it really means that the supplier is also transparent about all that data and can actually document on how that was calculated, and in order to really check claims and make sure they can be used for accounting for the emissions that are then driving your emissions in scope 3. I hope that that gives.
Yeah, I would maybe formulate it even a little bit more precisely. I guess, like, yeah, the goal is not offsetting, the goal is reduction, right? And if you want to develop the suppliers, it's really like, do they have set targets? Can they show which kind of actions are they taking, and how they ultimately reduce in the end emissions, and therefore also risk working with them, right? And it doesn't have to be overnight, that's for sure. Like, everyone needs a period, and therefore working together is really the way going forward. Maybe for Max, you said, like, yeah, you're working with companies on the whole implementation, and it really needs this whole process to integrate it as well. Like, and yeah, what do you see? What are maybe the typical starting barriers? What does it need to get into it? Is it like getting their own team on board, or is it really more like really contacting suppliers in a market where you feel like, I shouldn't put like another crisis on top in my supply chain? What do you think are the barriers to be tackled this year? And do you see any solutions for that or best practices?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think just a brief comment maybe about the question prior, because I agree with everything that's been said, right? So offsetting, I think, had pretty bad press lately. And what we want to do, and offsetting brings it quite a lot into a financial debate. And I think the goal here is to avoid and reduce emissions and start this process. So, but what you talked about and what's a challenge for companies to start? Yes, I think the big picture sometimes is an issue, right? And we've had the picture of the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals in total. So a lot of the times actors don't even see the exact path, right? They don't see a red line, and you can get lost pretty easy in this challenging and complex and ambiguous world. So what we see as a good starting point is to define a true north, right? And understand what is our goal. And the first exercise, and this is really just clearly towards decarbonization, makes sense to come from a meta level and say, what are our regulatory goals from a government perspective, right? What are the goals from Germany, for example, or the EU? Do we have company goals in place? And if that's the case, do we have purchasing goals? And if that's not in case, that's a good starting point to decide where do we go from here, and then really start with the processes, because it's important to know why. I think we've made a checkbox there. It's important in the next step to know how, and then operate it. But I think to map out this process, as we just did, is a good helping point and is a good starting point to start this journey towards decarbonization, and then understand really what problem you're trying to solve, and then find the right partner here to make this easier, because it's if you don't have a process, you can't digitalize it, right? And it's the starting point, in our opinion, or in my opinion.
Great. Yeah, then thanks a lot almost for the closing words. I like to comment on what you said, because there was also a last question, like how we are different maybe from different platforms out there. You said, right, in sustainability, there are so many topics out there and it can feel very overwhelming. But from the nowadays regulation, we see there's a very strong need for climate targets and decarbonization. And it's like addressed from Green New Deal broken down to like national climate goals, and really brought also into reporting, including really also your scope 3 emissions. So there's a very specific need to look into your supply chain on the topic of climate, and that is where we differentiate and really focus on that whole area of developing suppliers on climate and go for decarbonization. And yeah, as promised, the hour is always very quick around, I would say, or over. So if you like, you can join in April, our next two webinars. Next one will be just, so to say, the logical continuation of today. So it will be about how to calculate Scope 3 emissions along your supply chain, how to integrate here, so to say, the effort you start when going in supply chain engagement for decarbonization. And then the second one will be actually together with Exponential Roadmap, an international initiative to really bring corporates together, driving forward decarbonization in supply chain. And I think they have very exciting examples of like how it's done so far and how it trickles down also from bigger corporates to suppliers, and sharing very practical guidance on how to build up such programs. But yeah, learning also from examples. So having said that, I very much thank you, Max, for joining today and sharing our work together, and also Yasha for giving insights in the platform. And I would hope you have a sunny afternoon and it was weird April weather, I think, all over Germany. So maybe it snows, maybe not. But I would wish everyone a very good afternoon and success in driving climate transformation.
Great. Thanks for the invite. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
See you both.